2 hours after my son joked I was the last manual dinosaur I got laid off 30 years gone, over lukewarm meatloaf and a blinking voicemail light. Name's Weldon Hargrove, 60 technician, well former. The air in that break room smelled like burnt coffee and cheap disinfectant, and my old brass toolbox sat untouched by the door like it already knew. Ever been blindsided by someone who thinks they're better than you? Let's talk. I told Bryce over breakfast that I never went to college. He laughed like I'd just admitted I thought the earth was flat. Figures, he muttered, eyes still on his phone. 2 hours later, I was fired from the job I'd held for 30 years. The morning had started like any other. Scrambled eggs, burnt toast, coffee reheated in the microwave. Bryce, home for a few days between job interviews and what he called transition periods, sat across from me in his polished loafers and navy blazer, as if our kitchen were a boardroom. I told him about a new part I'd finally managed to retrofit on one of the shop's aging welders. He gave a half smile. "Manual dinosaurs still roaming, huh?" he said, stirring almond milk into his protein shake. I chuckled then. Now that line echoes like a nail in my spine. At 11:27 a.m., the call came from Carl Boysen in HR. The voice was clipped, polite, and utterly detached. Due to budgetary realignments, strategic workforce optimization, your position is among those impacted. No warning, no severance. Just a folder with a letter and instructions to clear out by noon. I didn't argue, didn't curse, just nodded, walked out past the framed Employee of the Month photo from 2002, and felt the world tilt slightly off-center. It wasn't anger yet, just silence, the kind that builds. Back home, Bryce was still glued to his laptop, headphones in. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the kitchen table where a mug still sat untouched from this morning, one I hadn't used since Benny's funeral. White ceramic, chipped rim, the words Benny's Bench etched in fading blue. I reached for it, hesitated, then turned toward the garage. The air in there was cooler, mustier. A faint scent of motor oil, old wood, and something else, maybe time. I flipped on the light and saw the metal box right where I'd left it. Pristine, heavy, with a brass nameplate that read, Benny, 1994. I ran a hand across its top. No dust. I guess I'd been visiting it more often than I thought. Opening it felt like opening a vault of who I used to be. Wrenches, a socket set with one piece missing, a folded note from Benny, age 9, with a crayon drawing of us fixing his red wagon. The hinges creaked like old bones. Behind me, I heard the front door open. Bryce was leaving again, probably to meet someone at a craft cocktail bar downtown. I caught a glimpse of his leased BMW pulling out of the driveway, chrome, glinting in the afternoon sun. In my hand was the envelope from HR. White, thick paper, bold red header, final notice, benefits termination. I placed the envelope gently next to the box, sat down on the workbench, and exhaled long and slow. My knees cracked. My palms were sweating. I picked up a pair of pliers and rotated them absently. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about something else. I whispered into the stillness of the garage. This ain't over. I hadn't said Benny's name out loud in 16 years. It slipped out before I knew it. Just a murmur half whispered into the sawdusty light of my basement workshop. The room still smelled faintly of tung oil and old sweat. I hadn't touched the tool bench in months. Maybe years. As I reached for my thermos, the old Stanley with the dent near the lid, I traced my thumb along the groove. That dent had a story, one that started and ended with a scaffold, a name no one at the company said anymore, and a guilt that never really left. Back in 2002, Knoxville summers came in hard and wet. I'd been a senior tech for over a decade by then, full of bark and swagger, mentoring trainees like it was sacred duty. That's how Benny Jackson came into my life. 19. Rail-thin, bright eyes, hands like a machinist's, and manners like a Sunday school preacher. I took to him fast. "You're different," I told him once halfway through a shift. "You ask before you guess." He just shrugged and smiled. "My mom says it's okay not to know everything, as long as you're teachable." That stuck with me. Still does. We were installing HVAC lines 4 stories up. Benny was checking alignment when the call came over the radio, something about weight load thresholds. Static garbled the rest. I told him to stay put. I told him. the scaffolding gave. It didn't shatter, it slumped, like a rug pulled out from under. The last thing I saw was his hand jerking out toward mine. A reflex, not even fear in his eyes yet. Just surprise. He died on impact. The company sent flowers. Then silence. HR scrubbed records, shifted timelines. They said the scaffold faulted due to unforeseen variables. I fought for an inquiry. They fought back with attorneys. When I suggested a memorial plaque on site, they laughed. Said OSHA wouldn't allow it. Said it would look like an admission of guilt. So I built one myself. Benny's bench sat under a sweet gum tree behind the employee lot. Welded by hand. Brass plate polished weekly. For a while, folks sat there on their breaks. Then fewer did. Then none. They cut the tree down in 2006 for an expansion. I brought the bench home. Now in 2019, in my basement, I ran a cloth over Benny's box untouched, since his mother gave it to me after the funeral. Inside the brass still shone, but fingerprints had bloomed smudged like echoes. Taped to the lid was a photo. Grainy, sun-faded. Me and Benny on-site arms slung, both of us smirking like kings of our little realm. Behind the photo, folded twice, was a note in Benny's looping print. Don't let them turn you into a suit. 16 years. And the words hit harder than any layoff notice ever could. I didn't cry. But something deep in my chest shifted like an old ratchet unsticking. I closed the box, and with a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, I reached for my dusty Rolodex names long untouched. Guys who owed me, guys who remembered. Somewhere in there was a number for Dale Warner, retired safety inspector, the last man to fight beside me before management shoved him out. It was time to remember what we'd let slide. The last person I expected to see behind that diner counter was Clay Godwin. He turned at the sound of the doorbell, subtle hollow like a throat being cleared, and his eyes locked on mine before I could even say a word. Clay. Broader shoulders than I remembered, hair trimmed, sharp jawline, edged by time, but still familiar. He smiled, and for a moment, I was back in 2003, watching him fumble with a rusted coupler and mutter cusses under his breath like a hymn. Weldon, he asked, stepping around the counter. His name tag, ironic as hell, read VP Midwest Engineering LLC. Not a fry cook, not a fluke. He was here on purpose. I blinked, unsure how to place him in the setting. What they let VPs run breakfast shifts now. He laughed. Only when they owe someone pie and explanations. Darla, the waitress with half a century of town gossip in her apron, dropped 2 mugs of coffee on our table before we sat. Figured you boys wouldn't want to wait. She winked and disappeared, humming a Hank Williams tune. We settled into a corner booth where the windows overlooked a parking lot dusted with leaves. Late fall in Des Moines smelled like burning wood and tired cornfields. The jazz playing from above made me feel like I was in someone else's memory. You look good, he said. I look tired, I replied. Same thing at our age. I sipped the coffee. Cheap burnt, but it had the dignity of having been made by hand. He folded his napkin into a triangle and slid it between his fingers like a worry stone. I heard about the layoff, he said. You deserved better, I stared out the window. Better doesn't sell stock options. Clay hesitated. I shouldn't say this, but it wasn't just cost cutting. You were targeted. That pulled me back. Targeted? He nodded. There was an internal advisory panel. Your name came up. Bryce was on it. My stomach sank, but my face stayed stone. My own son. He looked down. I wasn't there, but the memo got passed around. You were marked as legacy baggage, too much influence, too little alignment with the firm's direction, which means I cared more about the work than the branding. Clay didn't answer, but the silence confirmed it. You left before it got this bad, I said. I had to. I tried to fix things. But private equity came in like a storm, slashing, pivoting, dressing the place up to sell. It stopped being about engines or clients, became a spreadsheet circus, and I went sideways, found a place with quieter ambition. I missed the smell of grease, though. I chuckled. You never did like offices. Still don't. That's why I asked you here. He pulled a napkin from the holder, then fished a pen from his jacket pocket. On the napkin, he wrote a series of letters slowly, carefully. like each one cost something. MWEQ, he said, underlining it twice. That's the parent firm, publicly traded. I raised an eyebrow. So it's bleeding. They made dumb bets on automation skipped stress testing. They're scrambling to stay above water. If someone had insider knowledge or a moral vendetta, they might be able to dismantle a few things. He pushed the napkin to me like it was a key. You taught me how to dismantle a compressor blindfolded. I think you can dismantle something bigger now. I looked down. The letters bled slightly into the napkin's soft edges on something sharp. My fingers remembered the weight of tools. My gut remembered betrayal. I'm not a hacker, I said. No, but you're a builder. And builders know exactly where to pull, so the whole tower shifts. I reached for my phone. The ticker loaded slow. Spotty signal or divine suspense I didn't know. Stock was down 11% in a quarter. Analysts whispering lawsuits. Investor boards in panic mode. Bryce doesn't know half of what he's playing with, I muttered. No, Clay said. But you do. Outside, the wind picked up, swirling a plastic bag into a knot on the windshield of a pickup. The street lamps flickered on, casting orange halos across the glass. I tapped the screen off and looked back at Clay. His face was calm, quiet, like a man who knew the engine had already started and was waiting for me to shift gears. This ain't about revenge, he said. It's about setting things straight, about honoring people like Benny who got forgotten. That name landed hard, like a wrench dropped on concrete. I folded the napkin and slid it into my jacket pocket. You still drink your coffee black always. Then this next cup's on me. But after that, we get to work. Clay smiled. Thought you'd never say it. And somewhere in the part of me that still remembered calloused hands and Benny's grin, something shifted. Not anger, not ego, just alignment. A long-buried compass clicking back to north. Buying stock is surprisingly easy when you don't tell your son. I clicked the final confirm button while a kettle whistled in the background. The shares were mine now, 6% of the company I'd given 30 years to and that my own son was trying to reshape in his own image. I didn't feel like a shareholder. I felt like a man holding a loaded wrench, waiting for a bolt to turn the wrong way. Earlier that week, Clay had connected me to a broker who specialized in discrete acquisitions. Family offices do it all the time, he'd said over steak and scotch, as if that made me any less nervous. Shell structures are legal, just complicated, but you're the guy who taught me patience and torque angles. This is no harder. In the basement, I stood over Benny's old workbench, now peppered with nicks and oil stains, and memories I didn't always ask for. I ran a gloved finger along the edge where I'd once inscribed his initials with a soldering iron the week he passed his safety certification. BJ, 2003, still visible beneath the grit. That night, Bryce came over for our annual pre-Christmas dinner. He was wearing a cashmere sweater the color of slate and carrying a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce. Marla Jean said hi, he noted casually as he poured. She remembers you from those early HR transition days, says you were persistent. I smiled into my plate. Always tried to be. Bryce clicked his tongue. We're dealing with some pushback, though. Minority shareholders digging in their heels makes innovation tough. I said, passing him the overcooked roast. The outer layer had turned leathery under the broiler. I watched him chew slowly, trying not to wince. Between courses, I excused myself. Upstairs in my small office, I printed the latest quarterly update and folded it into a yellow folder labeled with a single word, Jan. The date glared up at me from the header, Annual Shareholders Meeting. Back at the table, Bryce raised his glass. To new blood, sharper tools, and CEOs who know EBITDA, he toasted. His smile was polished, blinding almost. I nodded, saying nothing. Words seemed too brittle for that moment. Later, after he'd left, I returned to the garage. The box sat on the workbench. When I reached to open it, the lid slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a dull clang. A sharp crack appeared along the hinge, small but impossible to ignore. I kneeled, fingers trembling slightly as I examined the break. Years of careful handling, and now this. Grabbing the duct tape from Benny's drawer, I sealed the crack with slow, deliberate strips. It looked crude, even desperate, but it would hold, for now. I stared at it for a long while, remembering the first time I opened it hours after Benny's funeral. His mother had handed it to me herself, eyes swollen. He looked up to you more than you knew, she whispered. He'd want you to have this. Inside the lid taped securely since that day was Benny's final note, "Don't let them turn you into a suit." A chill crept through my spine despite the warmth of the garage heater humming in the corner. I ran my thumb along the taped edge, like sealing a wound not quite ready to close. Back inside, I tossed the dinner scraps, wiped down the counter, and opened my laptop. A new email blinked at the top of my inbox, subject Annual Shareholders Meeting. January 18th, 2020. Location Executive Hall, 4th floor, Midwest Engineering HQ. I stared at it for a long while before clicking the little printer icon in the corner. The page slid out, warm ink still fresh, the future suddenly closer than I'd planned. The wrapping paper Bryce had torn through still lay crumpled in the corner, a garish red with cartoon reindeer. I picked one up. To Dad it read in Bryce's quick professional scrawl. The box had contained a wireless charging pad. No note, no explanation, just utility. In the silence of the living room, I glanced at the fireplace mantel. There, still slightly off-center, was the framed photo of Benny and me at the company picnic in 2002. He wore a backward cap and a grin too wide for his face. I was holding a hot dog mid-laugh. That photo used to make me smile. Tonight it weighed heavy. I went to the garage again, not for the box this time, but for the smell. That blend of motor oil sawdust and rusted ambition. I needed it. I sat on Benny's old stool, the one with the uneven leg, and just listened. The wind outside scratched the door. Somewhere in the corner, a mouse skittered. For years, I'd told myself I stayed in the company for the pension, the routine. But really, I stayed because of ghosts. Benny's mostly, and now maybe mine. Not yet dead, but fading from the books. I pulled out a pad and started writing, not sure what it was, a speech, a letter, a threat. Maybe all three. Words came in bursts. Loyalty, blood, not spreadsheets. Invisible doesn't mean powerless. My handwriting wobbled, but the ink flowed sure. A different kind of tool in my hand. Bryce had always been the fast one, the planner. But he never understood leverage the way we old mechanics did. Torque wasn't just force, it was where and how you applied it. And when. The time was coming. I could feel it. In the chill of the garage. In the crack of the box. In the silence after a son's toast. And most of all, in my own bones. Something was about to give. I hadn't worn a suit in 12 years. Felt like putting on someone else's skin. The last time I buttoned a collar this stiff, I was giving a eulogy. Today felt eerily similar, except the death was corporate, and the coffin held 30 years of my sweat. Outside the Chicago Tower, snow slush lined the curbs. Inside, marble floors and glass elevators reflected a world I had never belonged to. The security guard at the entrance glanced at my badge. His eyes paused a beat too long. "Good luck in there, Mr. Hargrove," he muttered. The elevator ride to the 18th floor was slower than I expected. Each ding of the floors passed like a metronome's steady final. As I ascended, I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal suit, one I hadn't touched since Marlene's funeral. It still carried a trace of her perfume, lilac, and clean linen. The hallway outside the boardroom was all sharp lines and neutral tones, artificial calm, to mask the coming bloodletting. A receptionist offered me a name badge I didn't take. My hands were busy, one clutching a manila folder, the other sweating through the handle of my old briefcase. Inside, the boardroom buzzed. White shirts, glossy tablets, eye rolls, behind polite smiles. Bryce was already at the front, gesturing to a screen, making agile growth sound like gospel. He hadn't seen me yet, but Marla did. Her eyes flicked up, widened a shade, then turned dismissive like brushing lint off a lapel. I waited until the Q&A. I waited until every other hand had lowered, every safe query about dividends or regulatory compliance had passed. Then I stood. "Mr. Hargrove," the moderator said, stumbling. "I have a question about the Etheron project," I said evenly. The temperature dropped 5 degrees. Somewhere in the back, Clay shifted. Bryce's voice cut in all velvet and daggers. "My father has recently taken an interest in our operations given his new position as a minority shareholder." I let that hang in the air, then stepped forward and placed the folder on the polished table. One by one, I pulled out the pages. Line items, email printouts. invoices from shell vendors that looped back to two names, Bryce Hargrove and Marla Jean. The murmurs began. Fingers tapped phones. Marla stiffened. Bryce's neck flushed. And lastly, I said 3% of your voting stock now sits in an irrevocable trust under the name Marlene Hargrove. Clay sat up. Marla blinked. Bryce dropped his pen. That's when he stood mouth taut, nostrils flared, and left. No goodbye, no rebuttal, just the thud of his shoes fading down the hallway. I didn't smile, not yet, because the war had only begun. As the boardroom settled into uneasy whispers, I remained standing. Someone from legal whispered to Marla. She waved it off, too proud or too rattled to engage. The moderator looked toward the stage, uncertain whether to proceed or call a recess. I knew this was only the first blow, and it had landed. I stepped back, letting the papers speak in their own silence. One had a smear of coffee from my kitchen counter that morning, a detail Bryce wouldn't miss. He hated mess, hated emotion too. It wasn't efficient. Clay met my gaze from the far end. He gave me the smallest nod, confirmation perhaps, or warning. We hadn't spoken since Denny's, but we both knew I hadn't come this far just to make a speech. I had come to shift ground. Back in the lobby, I took off the name badge I'd been forced to wear at the door. It fluttered into a trash bin beside the revolving doors. The Chicago wind outside sliced through my coat, but I didn't care. My phone buzzed once, then twice. Emails, no doubt. Or the first shots of panic from Bryce's corner. Good. Across the street, a coffee shop glowed with orange light. I went and ordered black coffee and found a seat near the window. I pulled out the old photo of Marlene and me on our wedding day, the same one I'd used to open her trust. She looked young, fearless, the kind of woman who'd never let anyone steal her name for a scam. I raised the cup toward the street, toward the tower beyond the glass. "This is for you," I whispered. "Let's burn the whole thing down brick by brick." The coffee had gone cold by the time I stood. Outside, the sky had turned the color of steel. I walked past the revolving door again, back into the bitter air that smelled of diesel and headlines. Everything felt louder now, the screech of the train, the horn of the taxi, the rhythm of my boots on the sidewalk. Like the city itself was awake. Somewhere in that tower, Bryce was scrambling. I pictured him hunched over his phone, calling damage control, drafting statements, deleting files. But numbers didn't lie. Paper trails didn't vanish. And memories, real ones, tend to linger in the cracks of marble walls. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity. I needed a way to remind every suit in that room that legacy wasn't measured in market caps or exit strategies. It was measured in the hands you shook, the voices you listened to, the people you remembered. Like Benny, like Marlene. And now maybe like me. I hailed a cab and told the driver to head toward Union Station. As the car pulled away, I glanced at my reflection in the window. Still wearing the suit. Still not mine. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in someone else's skin. I felt like I was shedding it. The company called it a realignment. Bryce called it regret. I called it payback. There was a bite in the February air, the kind that sliced under your collar and made your bones feel like rusted bolts. I sat alone at the rooftop cafe in Chicago, sipping something the barista called a cortado, though it tasted like chalk with a hint of defeat. COVID murmurs had begun infiltrating the radio, and the streets below were quieter than usual. A cold silence was spreading outside and in. The napkin with Benny's scrawl was still in my jacket pocket. "Don't become what we hated." I'd read it 3 times since waking up that morning, the ink nearly smudged from my fingertips. I didn't expect Bryce to show up. He was in a trench coat too expensive for the season tie, slightly loose, the look of a man who wasn't sure whether to fight or apologize. "You got 5 minutes," he said, not waiting for an answer. I nodded, motioning to the chair across from me. He sat stiffly, like it was a negotiation, not a conversation. I didn't know about the stake, or the filings he started. "You blindsided me. You fired me. I didn't." He stopped himself, lips tightening. "I advised the restructure. It wasn't personal. That's the thing, Bryce. You think business isn't personal, but it always is." He tapped the table, the rhythm betraying nerves. "Why didn't you push me more? When I was younger, you let me drift. I looked at him, really looked. For the first time in a decade, I saw the boy beneath the blazer. Because I wanted you to build your own bench, not live on mine. Silence. Just the wind tracing steel beams above us. I bought the rights to the name, I said. Benny's bench. It's mine now. He blinked. You what? The company let it expire, didn't even renew the trademark. I picked it up for $70 in a 2-week wait. His jaw twitched. You're naming a product after him, I'm naming a promise. He stood abruptly, chair scraping concrete. You think this makes us even? No, I said quietly, but it makes me right. He left without another word. By the time I got home, the sun was slipping behind the bare elms. I walked into the garage, the same garage I'd walked into after Benny died, after Bryce was born, after I'd signed the papers. The box sat on the workbench, the one with Benny's name still engraved in brass, now dulled with time. I ran my fingers over it, then turned to leave, bumping the table with my elbow. Crash! It hit the concrete floor with a sound that echoed like a rifle shot in a canyon. The latch snapped. Tools spilled like bones. I knelt slowly, my breath caught. The box lay split hinges loose, one corner, bent upward like a wound. For a moment, I just stared. Then I reached for the yellow electrical tape, the kind Benny used on his lunch pail, back when he'd forget the lid was loose. I sealed the box with one clean stripe straight down the middle, not to hide the break, to honor it. I stayed there a while, kneeling the beam from my flashlight, slicing across the darkened walls like an old searchlight. The email alert buzzed on my phone. Subject acquisition finalized. Executive team restructured. 3 months later, I got a call from a kid named Travis. His voice cracked like an ungreased joint, nervous but hopeful. Mr. Hargrove, my dad worked with you years ago. Name's Eric Voss. He said if I ever got serious about doing something real with my hands, I should find you. I stood in my garage, wiping dust off a half-sawn plank of oak. The yellow tape on Benny's box still held firm, like a scar healed but never forgotten. Travis cleared his throat. My dad told me about Benny's bench. Is it real? That word landed harder than I expected. I paused. It was. Might be again. The drive to Sioux City was long and open fields rolling green in the June sun sky, too wide to hold grudges. Clay had given me directions, said the kid had something I ought to see. The address led to a low-slung building with corrugated walls, the kind of place where real work happened and no one wore lanyards. Inside, the smell hit first motor oil. Hot metal and something sweet, maybe cinnamon from someone's thermos. Travis met me near a steel lathe, eyes wide, palms calloused BB, carved faintly on the side of his crescent wrench. You taught my dad how to true a bearing, he said without preamble. He's still got that tool, says. You told him a straight cut starts with a steady hand. I gave a half smile. Sounds like something I'd say. He led me to the back where a half-dozen other apprentices, none older than 20, gathered around a battered red toolbox. On its lid, nailed in clean brass, Benny's Bench 2.0. You built this, I asked. We all did. Story's been floating around since the shareholder meeting leak. Some of us don't want to go to college. We want to build stuff that stays. A warmth sharper than pride bloomed in my chest, the kind of feeling that didn't come with titles or benefits packages. Later that afternoon, Clay joined us at the local community hall. He hadn't changed much, still wore those boots that clicked too loud. On-Tile still leaned with one shoulder against door frames like he owned them. There's something brewing, he said after the introductions. We're setting up a foundation, community-driven, skills first. We could use someone like you on the board. I looked at him, at Travis, at the dozen pairs of eyes quietly watching me from folding chairs and tool-stained jeans. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was carrying Benny's memory alone. A small figure shuffled through the door, Benny's mom. Gray now, slower than I remembered, but when she looked at the box and touched the nameplate, her chin trembled. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Before leaving, Travis pulled something from his satchel, a carved wrench, smaller than standard initials, BB inked into the handle. I made this in shop class, he said, handing it to me like it was sacred. That night, I sat by the old bench in my garage phone. buzzing with foundation emails I hadn't opened yet. The box was still there, taped and intact. But something in me had shifted. I pulled out my checkbook, the kind I hadn't touched in years, the ink stuttering as I signed my name. "Time to weld something that lasts," I whispered. The shop smelled of motor oil, pencil shavings, and second chances. It was fall again, the kind that turns soybean leaves gold and sets the sky ablaze with a cold fire. The kind of season that feels like both a memory and a promise. The grand opening of the Benny's Bench workshop was modest as Weldon had requested. No ribbon cutting by officials in suits, just neighbors, families, and the kinds of kids who liked to take things apart to understand how they worked. The workshop sat at the edge of a reclaimed industrial lot in Sioux City, where rust had once spread faster than opportunity. Now freshly painted walls stood in defiance of decline, and the gravel lot was filled with pickup trucks. Not because they were stylish, but because they worked. Weldon walked through the entry hall where a simple plaque greeted everyone in memory of Benny Jackson, 1983-2002. He built more than he broke. Just beyond the plaque, the donor wall stretched along one side. It wasn't grandiose, just etched steel on wood backing, names of those who gave in money or sweat. Weldon's eyes scanned the bottom corner and lingered on a small, unassuming inscription: B. Hargrove, no middle name, no degree title, just a quiet offering. Inside the floor was a warm brown epoxy, faintly smelling of varnish. Rows of workbenches lined the walls, each one stained slightly different from the next, proof of use, not neglect. The apprentices, all in gray coveralls marked BB2, were elbow-deep in engines, welds, and circuits. Laughter crackled. One kid accidentally activated a belt sander, sending a puff of sawdust skyward like a rogue cloud. Weldon walked past, nodding slightly. His steps took him to the glass case near the back, its frame walnut, the lighting gentle. There it was, the metal box, polished now, almost glowing. The nameplate read, Benny 1994. The latch had been replaced, but the scratches were kept. He opened it slowly. Inside were the tools, all arranged meticulously. A folded note, yellowed slightly from age, lay beneath a wrench. His own handwriting, added just last week, was taped carefully to the lid. For the next hands, make it yours. Behind him, someone cleared their throat. It was Benny's mother. Her eyes glistened though she smiled. "Looks better than the day you first packed it," she said. Weldon nodded. "I just kept it from falling apart until it found the right hands." They stood in silence. A young apprentice passed by and tipped his hat to the box as though it were a relic. Later, Travis walked over carrying a red toolbox, freshly stamped with Benny's Bench 2.0 in enamel. He set it down next to Weldon and said, "Mind showing me how to fix a rivet dent?" "It's being stubborn." Weldon took the mallet, handed it back to Travis, and said, "Soft tap. Let the metal tell you what it wants." Travis hesitated, then struck gently. The dent eased. "You'll make your own mark soon enough," Weldon murmured. As the sun set, golden light poured through the high windows. Clay made his way over and dropped off a stack of intake forms. "We've got 12 new applicants for spring." Word spreading. Weldon leaned back on the bench, fingers tracing a scratch on the wood. He looked around the room, filled with motion and meaning. Every clang of metal, every shout, every burst of laughter was a hymn to what had been broken and now remade. In a quiet moment, as the crowd thinned and the apprentices swept the floor, Weldon sat alone again. He opened the box one last time, touched the worn handle of Benny's wrench, and let his fingers rest there. Then he closed the lid, sealed it gently, and stood. Second chances weren't loud. They didn't announce themselves with applause or headlines. They looked like duct tape, like a bent wrench, like a red toolbox passed between generations. As he turned off the workshop lights, Weldon paused by the door. One leaf had blown in amber and brittle. He picked it up, pocketed it, and stepped into the cool evening. Behind him, the lights dimmed, but the workbench stayed warm. The night breeze carried the scent of motor oil and autumn leaves as I locked up the workshop one last time. That old metal box, once cracked and silent, now gleamed under the lamplight, sealed steady and full of stories it no longer had to carry alone. Sometimes we spend our lives trying to fix what's been bent out of shape, only to learn that the real work is passing on what we've mended. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet bench, a second chance, and a young man listening. If you've ever found hope where something once broke, tell me about it. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Or maybe you're still waiting for one. Either way, the bench is open.